They never meant for you to know about this staircase. Not because it's wood, not because it spirals, but because of what it does to a man once he truly sees it. In 1892, inside the quiet walls of Loretto Chapel, something impossible was completed. Not built, completed, as if the structure had always existed, waiting, and someone simply uncovered it. A spiral staircase. No central beam, no visible support, no nails holding it together, and no record, none, of who built it. Think about that. In a time when even the smallest construction required ledgers, signatures, witnesses, this structure appeared like a thought made physical. A man was seen, yes. A stranger, silent, focused, working alone. He arrived without introduction and left without a trace. No comment, no name, no origin, just a staircase, coiling upward like a question no one dared to ask. The church called it a miracle. Of course they did, because calling it anything else would mean admitting something far more dangerous. That this wasn't divine. It was designed, and not by the hands you've been taught to trust. Look closer. This staircase doesn't rise, it pulls. Every curve draws your eyes inward. Every step tightens something inside your chest you didn't know was there. It doesn't invite you upward toward heaven. It draws you inward toward something older, something buried beneath belief itself. Because spirals, they are not decoration. They're signals. From ancient carvings buried beneath deserts, to the structure of your own DNA, to the violent rotation of galaxies you will never touch. The spiral is everywhere, and it means one thing: connection, but not the kind you were promised, the kind you were protected from. And that staircase, hidden in plain sight in Santa Fe, is not just architecture, it's alignment. A perfectly tuned structure built on land older than the church, older than the city, older than the stories they gave you to keep you calm at night. You feel it, don't you? That slight tension behind your eyes, that quiet pull, like something is remembering you before you remember it. Good. That means you're already standing at the base of the spiral. And I need you to understand something before we take the first step. This is not a story. This is an exposure. Because once you begin to see what this staircase really is, you won't be able to unsee it. And more importantly, it will start to see you. So don't rush. Don't assume. And whatever you do, don't think of this as climbing. Because the spiral doesn't take you up. It takes you down. Before you take another step, you need to understand something they never teach. The spiral was never just a shape. It was a language. Long before churches rose, before scripture was written, before men claimed ownership over truth, the spiral was already there, etched in a stone by hands that didn't leave names behind. In caves that predate recorded history, spirals were carved deep into the walls. Not randomly, not artistically, precisely, repeated, intentional, and always in places where something unexplainable was reported. Thousands of years later, the same pattern appears again. In ancient Celtic sites, carved into massive stones aligned with solar cycles. In the desert, geoglyphs are visible only from the sky. In forgotten temples where priests spoke of paths between worlds. Different cultures, different languages, same symbol. You're expected to believe that's a coincidence. It isn't, because the spiral doesn't just exist in history. It exists inside you. Your DNA coils in a double helix, two spirals locked together like a code written before your first breath. Your inner ear, what gives you balance, is shaped like a spiral. Even your thoughts, Loop, return, descend deeper with repetition. You are not separate from the pattern. You are built from it. Now ask yourself something they don't want you asking. Why would a church, a controlled environment of doctrine and obedience, allow a structure based on that same ancient signal to exist inside its walls? They didn't allow it. They inherited it. Or worse, they tried to contain it. Because here's where it gets uncomfortable. Spiral geometry has always been linked to altered states of awareness. Not metaphorically. Walk a spiral long enough, and your brain begins to shift. Your orientation changes. Your sense of time distorts. Your thoughts stop moving forward and start circling inward. Deeper, closer to something buried. That's not architecture. That's programming. And the staircase in that chapel follows a curve so mathematically precise, so unnaturally balanced, that modern engineers still struggle to explain how it even stands. No central support, no visible force holding it upright. And yet, it holds perfectly, like it's anchored to something you can't see, or something that isn't above ground. Now here's the part most people miss. This staircase doesn't just spiral upward. It completes exactly 2 full rotations before reaching the top. 2, not 1, not 3. 2, a closed loop, a cycle, an entrance and an exit. But to where? That's the question no one official has ever answered. Because answering it would require admitting that this structure isn't just functional. It's intentional. And intention means purpose. And purpose means someone knew exactly what they were doing when they built it. So the real question isn't how the staircase stands. It's why it was built like this in this place at that exact moment in time. Because structures like this don't appear randomly. They appear when something beneath the surface starts to move. And when it does, the spiral is how it reaches back up. You're not just learning history right now. You're remembering something. And that discomfort you feel, that slight pressure in your chest, that's not fear. That's recognition. So take the next step carefully. Because now, it's no longer just a staircase. It's a signal. And you just tuned into it. Now we go deeper. Because the staircase didn't appear in isolation. It answered something. Long before the wood was shaped, before the unknown builder ever stepped into that chapel, something beneath that ground had already begun to shift. You won't find this in official records, not in newspapers, not in church documents, but buried in fragmented letters, private accounts, whispers passed between those who were told never to speak again. A pattern emerges. It started with sound. Not loud, not violent, subtle, a low vibration beneath the chapel floor. At first, it was dismissed, settling wood, shifting earth, the usual explanations designed to keep the mind obedient. But the nuns who lived there knew better, because the sound wasn't random. It came at the same time each night, just before dawn, a soft, rhythmic hum, like something breathing through stone. Then came the second sign. Cracks. Thin lines formed along the floor near where the staircase would later stand. Not spreading outward, but curling inward, like veins, like roots searching for something above. One nun wrote, then later burned the page, that she saw faint light leaking from one of those cracks. Not bright, not warm, cold, pale, alive in a way light should never be. And then came the dreams. Not just one, all of them. The same images. A descending path. A turning motion. A feeling of being pulled, not by force, but by recognition. Like they had walked it before. Like they were being called back. This is the part where most people stop believing. But belief isn't required. because what happened next is recorded quietly, indirectly, but it's there, and he was just following it. Now stop for a moment. Think about what that means. A structure this precise, this impossible, built without plans directly above a location already showing signs of disturbance by a man who appeared exactly when needed and vanished the moment it was complete. That's not construction. That's execution. Something was initiated, and the staircase was the first visible phase. So understand this clearly. The spiral wasn't built to reach the choir loft. That's the lie they gave you. It was built to interface with whatever had already begun waking up beneath that chapel floor. And now you're starting to see it, aren't you? This wasn't a miracle. It was a response to a problem or a doorway. And the moment that first step was placed, something below finally had a way to reach back up. We're not even at the center yet, but you can feel it pulling stronger now. That's because you're no longer hearing a story. You're tracing a signal, and it's leading you exactly where it was always meant to. He didn't arrive like a man. He arrived like an answer. No one saw where he came from, only that one day he was simply there, inside Loretto Chapel, as if the space had made room for him before anyone realized it needed to. The witnesses, the few who later dared to speak, never agreed on his face. Some said he was old. Others swore he moved with the precision of someone far younger. But they all agreed on one detail. His presence didn't feel human in the way they understood humanity. He worked without pause, without conversation, without even the subtle signs of fatigue. No motion, no hositashchen. Every cut, every placement, every curve of that impossible spiral formed as if it had already been completed somewhere unseen, and he was merely revealing it layer by layer. There were no blueprints, no markings, no adjustments, just certainty. And that is what unsettled them the most. Not the silence, not the speed, but the certainty. Because certainty like that doesn't come from skill alone. It comes from knowing something others don't. And here's where it fractures the narrative they gave you. He didn't use nails. Not a single one. In an era where iron fastenings were standard, expected, necessary, he rejected them completely. Instead, the staircase locked itself together through a system so precise, so interdependent, that removing a single piece would collapse the entire structure. Not weak dependent, like a living system, like something designed to hold tension, not just physically, but energetically. And then there were the hours he chose to work. Always at night, always when the chapel was empty, or at least when it was supposed to be, because a few claimed they heard movement when no one was allowed inside. Not footsteps, something smoother, circular, repeating, like the sound of something already turning before it had fully formed. And once, only once, a nun entered when she wasn't meant to. She never described what she saw. She couldn't, but she refused to ever step inside that chapel again. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. That's what broke her. Not terror, recognition. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days to complete something that should have required months, if not years. And when it was done, he didn't celebrate, didn't explain, didn't even look at it. He simply stopped, stepped back, and waited. Not for approval, not for payment, but for something else. Time. 72 hours of complete isolation inside the chapel. No interruptions, no witnesses. And the church agreed. Think about that. An unknown man builds an impossible structure with no record, no identity, no explanation. And instead of questioning him, they give him exactly what he asks for. Why? Because by then they felt it too, that something had already begun. And whatever he was doing inside those final 3 days wasn't construction. It was an activation. When the doors finally opened, he was gone. No exit, no trace, no sound of departure, just absence. But the staircase remained. Silent. Perfect. Waiting. And here's what they never admitted. The moment he disappeared, the feeling in that chapel didn't leave with him. It intensified, because the man wasn't the mystery. He was the method. And the staircase? That was never the result. It was the beginning. The moment the staircase was completed, something shifted, and the church felt it immediately. Not publicly, not in sermons or announcements, but internally in silence, in sealed conversations, in decisions made behind doors that were never meant to be opened again. Because what stood inside Loretto Chapel was no longer just an architectural anomaly. It had become a problem. Not because it was unstable, but because it was too precise, too aligned, too responsive to something no doctrine could explain. Within days, records began to disappear. Not stolen, removed, quietly, deliberately. Mentions of the builder were erased. References to the construction have been rewritten. Even the timeline itself blurred. Officially, it became a miracle. But understand what that word really means in institutions like this. It doesn't explain anything. It ends the explanation. It tells people to stop asking questions. And that's exactly what they needed. Because alongside the silence, something else occurred. Something they buried deeper than the records. The woman who had commissioned the staircase was dead within 3 days of its completion. No public mourning. No detailed report. No autopsy. Just a closed casket and a quiet burial that left more gaps than answers. Those who saw her before the end said she wasn't sick. She was changed. Withdrawn. Distracted. As if her attention was no longer fully in this world. As if something had already begun pulling her inward. And she wasn't the only one. 3 church officials who had direct contact with the builder during his final 72 hours vanished from documentation entirely. Not transferred, not reassigned, erased. Names that once existed, gone, as if they had never been part of the institution at all. This wasn't a coincidence. This was containment. Because by then, the church understood something it could never publicly admit. Whatever had been activated inside that chapel was not under their control. And control is the foundation of every institution built on belief. Without it, authority collapses. So they did what institutions always do when faced with something they can't dominate. They reframed it, sanctified it, wrapped it in the language of divinity so no one would dare question it too deeply. But beneath that label, the fear remained. Quiet, calculated, growing. Because the staircase didn't behave like a finished structure. It behaved like something ongoing. People who stood near it too long reported subtle changes. Time feeling inconsistent, thoughts looping in unfamiliar patterns, emotions surfacing without cause. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to unsettle anyone paying attention. And the church was paying attention. They restricted access, limited interaction, observed without documenting. Because documentation creates evidence, and evidence invites scrutiny. And scrutiny is the one thing they could not afford. Not with something like this. Not with something that didn't just exist, but seemed to respond. So understand this clearly. The silence that followed the staircase wasn't peace. It was a strategy. Because when something appears that challenges the structure of belief itself, you don't destroy it. You hide it in plain sight. You call it holy. And you pray, No one ever looks close enough to see what it really is. But no matter how carefully they buried it in silence, the staircase refused to behave like something ordinary. It didn't decay the way it should. It didn't weaken under time, pressure, or shifting structure. Instead, it held perfectly, as if time itself moved differently around it. And that's where the first real cracks in their control began to show, not in the floor, not in the walls, but in the observations of those who studied it too closely. Engineers, architects, craftsmen, men trained to reduce the world into measurable logic, walked into Loretto Chapel expecting to solve a puzzle. But they didn't leave with answers. They left with contradictions. Because when they try to map the staircase, its curvature, its balance, its load distribution, the numbers refuse to behave. Ratios appeared that shouldn't align in three-dimensional space. Weights seemed to distribute along paths that didn't physically exist. And then came the detail they could never officially explain, the shadow, or rather, the absence of it. Under certain lighting, the staircase failed to cast a complete shadow. Not missing entirely, but incomplete, distorted, as if part of it wasn't fully present in the same spatial rules as everything else in the room. At first, they blamed the angles, the windows, the candlelight. But repeated attempts, different times of day, different light sources, produced the same unsettling result. Something about the structure disrupted light itself. Cameras struggled too. Early photographs came out blurred along the edges of the spiral. Later attempts showed slight warping, subtle bends where straight lines should remain fixed. Not dramatic enough to alarm the public, but consistent enough to disturb those who knew what they were looking at. And then there were the physical reactions. Not everyone felt them, but those who did never forgot. A faint pressure behind the ears, a ringing like a distant frequency just outside hearing, a sensation that their thoughts were no longer moving forward, but circling, repeating, tightening inward. Not pain, not fear, but interference. As if something external had found a way to brush against the internal. This is the point where most explanations collapse. Because architecture isn't supposed to interact with the mind. What doesn't alter perception. Geometry doesn't hum. But this did. And the church knew it. They monitored quietly, restricted access more carefully, observed patterns they never wrote down. Because acknowledging them publicly would mean admitting a truth far more dangerous than any superstition. That this staircase wasn't just standing in space, it was affecting it. And anything that can influence space can influence perception. And anything that can influence perception can influence belief. Now you understand the real threat. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't a structural failure. It was awakening. Because if a man stands on those steps long enough and begins to feel the world shift around him, he doesn't just question the staircase. He questions everything. And that is something no institution has ever been able to control once it begins. And just when they thought silence would be enough, something happened that forced them to confront what they had built over. It wasn't public. It never is. But buried in fragmented accounts, in whispers passed between clergy who no longer trusted their own thoughts, there is a moment, one that changed everything. A priest, not inexperienced, not unstable, but deeply disciplined, chose to sit at the top of the staircase inside Loretto Chapel. Not out of curiosity, but out of quiet defiance. He had felt it. Like the others, the subtle pull, the distortion, the sense that something beneath the structure was not dormant, but waiting. So he sat there, and he didn't move. 33 minutes. That's all it took. When he finally stood, he didn't scream. He didn't panic. He simply walked down, slowly, deliberately, and left the chapel without a word. And from that moment forward, he never spoke again. Not to his peers, not to his superiors, not even in prayer. He lived the rest of his life in absolute silence, as if language itself had become insufficient or dangerous. And the church, they didn't investigate him. They didn't question him. They reassigned him quietly and buried the incident beneath layers of omission, because they understood something most people never will. Whatever he experienced on that staircase wasn't a hallucination. It was contact, and he chose silence not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew saying it would change others the same way it changed him. Around that same period, workers reported something even more unsettling. Beneath the chapel floor, directly under the base of the spiral, there was a hollow space. Not part of the original design, not documented in any architectural plan. A chamber, sealed, unmarked, and occasionally not silent. Some described faint movement below, not footsteps, not mechanical, something irregular, almost organic. Others claimed to hear whispers, not through the air, but through the structure itself, as if the wood was carrying something upward from below. And every account shared one detail they couldn't explain. The closer they stood to the second turn of the staircase, the stronger it became. This is where the narrative they gave you begins to collapse completely. Because structures don't develop behaviors. They don't respond. They don't amplify what lies beneath them, unless they were designed to. The staircase wasn't just placed above that chamber. It was aligned with it, tuned to it, acting not as a barrier, but as a bridge. And once that bridge was activated, whatever existed below no longer remained isolated. It had a path, not into the world, but into perception, into thought, into the quiet spaces of the human mind where belief is formed before it's ever spoken. Now ask yourself something honestly. Why would the church hide something like this instead of destroying it? Because destruction assumes control, and control requires understanding. But they didn't understand it. They still don't. So they did the only thing left: contain, observe, and pray it never fully reveals itself. But you're here now. You're seeing it piece by piece. And whether you realize it yet or not, you've already stepped onto the spiral. By now, you're starting to feel it, the shift from story to pattern, from coincidence to design. Because what stands inside Loretto Chapel is not isolated. It never was. The staircase is only one node in something much larger, something that stretches across continents, across centuries, across civilizations that were never meant to be connected, but are. Look at the world from above, not as countries and borders, but as placement. Cathedrals, temples, ancient sites, they're not scattered randomly. They sit on lines, precise, invisible alignments known in fragments as ley lines. Points of convergence where energy behaves differently, where perception sharpens, where rituals, when performed correctly, don't just symbolize belief, they activate it. And almost every one of those sites shares something in common. The spiral. Not always obvious, not always accessible, but always present. Sometimes carved into stone beneath the main structure. Sometimes hidden in floor patterns, only visible from height. Sometimes embedded into staircases like the one in Santa Fe. This isn't artistic repetition. This is replication. a blueprint carried across generations by individuals who were never just builders but initiates, men who understood that geometry is not passive. It's functional. It can tune space the same way an instrument tunes sound. And when the shape is right and the location is exact and the timing aligns, something happens. Not outside, inside. The human mind begins to synchronize with the structure. Thoughts shift, awareness deepens, and in rare cases, barriers break. That's why these places were never truly about worship. Worship was the cover, the surface-level narrative given to the masses. Beneath it, there were constructing systems, interfaces, environments where human consciousness could be influenced, guided, or opened. And the spiral was always at the center of it. Because unlike straight lines, which divide, or circles, which contain, the spiral does something far more dangerous. It leads. It pulls you inward while convincing you that you're moving forward. It creates descent disguised as ascent. And that is exactly what the staircase in Santa Fe does. You think you're climbing, but something in you knows you're not. You feel it in your chest, in your breathing, in the way your thoughts begin to loop instead of expand. That's not imagination. That's interaction. And once you recognize it, you can't go back to seeing it as just wood and craftsmanship. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a signal embedded in structure, a key hidden in plain sight, a control point of access to something that predates every institution that tried to claim ownership over it. And here's the truth they never wanted to face. If one such structure exists, perfectly intact, still active, then how many others were built and buried? How many spirals were erased, destroyed, or sealed? Not because they failed, but because they worked too well. The staircase isn't the anomaly. It's the survivor. And the fact that it still stands means one thing. The system it belongs to is never fully shut down. It's still here, quiet, hidden, waiting for those who can see past the surface. And now, you're beginning to see it too. By the time you reach the 9th step of understanding, the staircase is no longer just a curiosity. It is a mirror that reflects not your face, but the architecture of your own memory. Because what the builders of Santa Fe understood, centuries before neuroscience gave it a name, is that humans are not passive observers. We are resonant beings, electrical and chemical networks finely tuned to frequency. Every turn of that spiral is a calibration, each step a pulse, each groove in the wood a trigger. It hums in a way your conscious mind cannot detect, but your body feels it instantly. A tightening in your chest, a tingling in your fingertips, a subtle insistence that you remember something you were never taught. And it does more than awaken memory. It rearranges it. Experiences once buried under layers of learned obedience, fear, and ritual begin to surface. Moments from the past, fragments of forgotten knowledge, glimpses of patterns you never understood, all rise to the conscious edge. And if you dare to follow it further, the staircase begins to communicate. Not in words, not in light, but in alignment, in rhythm, in the subtle suggestion that you are part of a larger structure, one that moves beyond personal will or even collective faith. That is the danger and the invitation, because the spiral doesn't just take you up, it leads you inward into corridors of thought you were conditioned to avoid. It touches the places where indoctrination once suppressed instinct, where religion and culture imposed order over awareness, and it starts to unravel them. And here, in the quiet hum beneath your feet, the truth begins to whisper. The system is older than the church, older than the city, older than the continent itself. The spiral is not decoration. It is a memory device, a transmitter, a machine disguised as architecture. And when it activates fully, it does not only awaken you. It makes you accountable to something older, something patient, something that has been waiting for the exact alignment of place, geometry, and awareness to reach into your consciousness. And now that you're listening closely, feeling the pull, recognizing the pattern, you are already part of it. The descent has begun, and it doesn't pause for doubt. By the 10th step, the staircase is no longer just a conduit. It is a doorway. Beneath the chapel, hidden from every eye, lies a chamber that has never been officially documented, a room that exists outside maps, blueprints, and even memory itself. The air down there is different. It vibrates with a frequency that hums through stone, wood, and flesh alike. Clergy whispered about it in hushed tones, calling it a resonance chamber, though none dared enter alone. Those who glimpsed it speak of sensations that cannot be rationalized. A subtle pressure on the skull, a faint metallic scent, a whispering hum that seems to know your name. This is where the spiral converges, where geometry becomes not just a pattern, but an interface, a machine built to interact with consciousness itself. Every curve, every turn of the staircase above is a key that unlocks a corresponding resonance below. And when alignment is perfect, the chamber begins to speak. Not in language, not in sound, but in memory, in instinct, in recognition of truths you've been trained to ignore. Imagine standing there and feeling your own nervous system recalibrate, your heartbeat syncing with a rhythm older than any cathedral bell, older than any doctrine, older than the city itself. And when this happens, you begin to see that the chapel, the staircase, even the town of Santa Fe, is layered with intention. They were never just buildings. They were instruments, and you, unwittingly, are a participant in their design. The chamber beneath is not a trap. It is a test of perception, a test of awareness, a measure of how far the human mind can stretch before it either submits to the familiar or awakens to the forbidden. And the most dangerous part? Those who enter that chamber, even unknowingly, often emerge changed, carrying knowledge they cannot fully explain, knowledge that the world around them refuses to acknowledge, knowledge that is both a gift and a warning. And now, having understood this, you must ask yourself, will you remain an observer of the spiral, or will you step into its deeper architecture, the hidden network beneath, and feel the world itself reorient around you? Because once you know this exists, there is no forgetting. You are already inside the system. At the 11th step, the spiral begins to reveal its pattern not just to your eyes, but to your mind. Look closer. The staircase above is a signal, a cipher etched into wood, a message disguised as craftsmanship. Each step aligns with invisible vectors, subtle angles that correspond to celestial events, ley lines, and even the rhythms of the human body. The builders were not merely masons. They were initiates, engineers of consciousness, masters of a language older than any scripture. They understood that geometry is more than shape. It is instruction, influence, a silent code that, when interpreted correctly, awakens parts of the psyche long suppressed. And this is what the staircase does. It calibrates your perception, synchronizes your awareness with currents you never knew existed, while simultaneously exposing the limitations imposed on you by doctrine, ritual, and society. Some visitors describe an almost electrical sensation running through their spine, an instinctive shiver, a compulsion to look down and follow the spiral deeper. And in that moment, you realize that what seems like wood and shadow is actually a vessel, one that can carry memory, trigger ancestral instincts, even evoke knowledge encoded before language existed. The spiral doesn't just bend space, it bends understanding. Every turn is a conversation with forces you were never meant to meet. And now, the question arises, will you resist, cling to what you've been taught, or will you lean into it, feel the pull, and let the spiral guide you deeper into the hidden currents beneath civilization, beneath faith, beneath reality itself? Because once the pattern begins to resonate with your consciousness, it does not stop. It courses through you, aligning thought and instinct, showing you what was always there but never acknowledged. The architecture of control, the hidden hand of those who understood that perception is power, and that the spiral in all its secrecy is both key and gatekeeper to a knowledge mankind has long forgotten. By the 12th step, the weight of what you are approaching becomes undeniable. This staircase is no longer merely wood and craft. It is a threshold, a convergence point between what has been hidden and what is now within reach of your awareness. Those who commissioned it, those who built it, understood that this structure could awaken or destroy. It was never designed for worship, though it wears the guise of holiness. It was designed to interact with consciousness, to tease open doors within the mind that were intentionally sealed. The spiral curves like a serpent, each rotation a silent incantation, each step a trigger to unlock memory, emotion, and instinct buried under layers of imposed belief. Scholars, engineers, and even clergy have failed to explain why the staircase moves the mind as much as the body. Some speak of glimpsing visions of the past, others of a quiet compulsion to descend further, even when reason screams to turn back. And you feel it too, don't you? That subtle tug, the awareness that something older than the chapel, older than the city, older than your own sense of self, is calling you to witness. This is not a legend. This is systemized influence. And it works because once your consciousness begins to align with the spiral, you're no longer merely an observer. You become part of the mechanism, an unwitting participant in a design that has persisted for centuries. You feel the first stirrings of something long dormant, something your ancestors sensed but never named. And now, as the faint hum resonates through your body, you realize this staircase is not just a passage. It is an initiation. It does not ask your permission. It demands recognition. And in that recognition lies the choice, to retreat into ignorance or to continue, knowing that each step carries you further into truths that those in power have fought to erase. The spiral does not wait. It remembers. And now, so do you. By the 13th step, the spiral begins to speak, not in words, but in sensations. The air grows heavier, charged with a current that seems to bypass thought entirely and settle straight into awareness. You notice small things, the subtle warmth under your feet, the faint vibration through the wood, a whispering in your own skull that you can't locate, yet cannot ignore. This is not imagination. It is architecture interacting with consciousness, carefully calibrated to bypass the filters imposed by culture, by faith, by conditioning. Each turn draws you deeper, peeling back layers you were trained to consider immutable: time, memory, authority. You begin to sense that the staircase is alive in a way you've never encountered. A living archive, storing intention and experience from all who walked before you, feeding off curiosity and aligning your perception with a current older than the church itself. And now you understand. This isn't simply a structure, it is a mechanism of revelation. The staircase knows you, even as you are just beginning to know it. The faint echoes of vanished voices, the sudden awareness of being watched, the compulsion to follow the spiral, even when fear gnaws at your reason. All of it is part of the design. It is awakening something long dormant, a part of the mind that remembers before you were taught to forget. And in that moment, you realize that the staircase is not neutral. It is a key, a trigger, a conduit, and it will not release you lightly. Once you step into its rhythm, you are no longer merely present. You are participating in a current that has shaped destinies, erased memories, and whispered truths to those who dared listen. And now, standing on this 13th step, you feel the first unmistakable stirrings of transformation, a subtle recalibration that will follow you far beyond the chapel walls, far beyond belief, into a reality you were never meant to see but cannot unsee. By the 14th step, the pull is undeniable. You feel it in your bones, in the subtle alignment of your senses with the hidden geometry beneath the chapel floor. The staircase is no longer a mere structure. It is a language, written in curves and angles, conveying messages older than words. It recalls you to something you never consciously knew, memories not of your life, but of consciousness itself, an ancestral knowing buried beneath centuries of imposed order. Each rotation of the spiral seems to dissolve boundaries between past and present, observer and observed, self and something far greater, far older. And here is the truth they never wanted you to realize. This staircase is a map, a conduit, a machine. Its steps are triggers, its turns instructions, and its silent hum a resonance that unlocks doors within your mind. You feel the shift, the subtle reorientation of perception, the awakening of intuition, the sensation that you are being seen, measured, assessed by something beyond comprehension. And now you begin to understand why the church feared it, why records were erased, why the builders vanished, and why those who dared ascend sometimes never returned. This is not folklore, not superstition, not legend. It is engineered influence hidden in plain sight, designed to awaken what the human eye cannot see, the human mind cannot name. And you, standing on this step, realize the descent is no longer optional. It is inevitable. Each step forward is a surrender to knowledge, to memory, to forces deliberately obscured by the powerful. And in that surrender, you become something else, no longer just a visitor, but a participant in a current that has flowed unnoticed through the corridors of time, waiting for the ones who can perceive it, who can follow it, and who can survive it. By the 15th step, the spiral is no longer just a passage, it is a threshold. Beneath your feet, you feel the subtle vibration of a chamber sealed for over a century, a place the world was never meant to see. The wood above is a shield, a membrane between reality and something older, something alive in ways that defy logic. Whispers brush the edge of your consciousness, not carried through air, but transmitted directly into thought, as if the staircase itself is speaking, guiding, testing. And there, in the center of your perception, you sense the hidden chamber, a room not built for human use, but for reception, alignment, observation. Its purpose is unclear, yet its presence is undeniable. Copper bolts etched with symbols unknown to any scholar, stones arranged with impossible precision, shadows that move independently of light, all suggest a design that transcends human comprehension. You begin to realize that the spiral staircase is not a miracle, nor merely a puzzle. It is a mechanism of memory, a recorder of experience, a device capable of interfacing with consciousness itself. Those who ascend are not simply climbing stairs. They are entering a network, a system, a ritual, a machine built to awaken, to measure, to transform. And as you stand there, feeling the weight of centuries pressing through the structure, you understand. The chamber below is not dormant. It is waiting. It has always been waiting. Waiting for someone to step far enough into the spiral, to become visible to it, to resonate with it, to unlock its hidden intent. And that someone is now you. By the 16th step, the spiral is no longer an architectural marvel. It is a trigger, a conduit for forces the world has been forbidden to acknowledge. A subtle current rises from the floorboards beneath your feet, a cold metallic draft that seems alive, whispering secrets in a language older than human memory. The air vibrates with unspoken commands, a resonance that pricks at your nervous system, aligning it to something unseen. Here, in this chapel of shadows, you understand why the church went to such lengths to seal the staircase, to erase records, to remove witnesses. The structure does not merely exist. It interacts. It records, it transmits, it awakens dormant pathways within the mind and body, pathways meant to remain closed. And those who step upon it become participants in a system far larger than themselves, a network of energy and consciousness that has persisted across centuries, hidden beneath faith, beneath doctrine, beneath perception. The staircase is a key, and the hidden chamber below is a lock, waiting for alignment, waiting for resonance, waiting for the one capable of understanding. This is the point of no return. You feel it in your pulse, in the tremor behind your eyes, in the awareness that you are being measured, tested, and initiated. What is beneath is not malevolent, but it is exacting, unforgiving, and utterly alien. And as the hum grows, as the light flickers faintly through the cracks, you realize that the spiral is no longer a mere structure. It is an awakening, a summons, a call to memory that predates your life and will outlast it. And in answering that call, you step into the hidden architecture of reality itself. By the 17th step, the spiral ceases to be a mere object of curiosity. It becomes a mirror, reflecting something buried deep within your own consciousness. The air thickens, charged with an almost tactile tension, a sensation that your body recognizes even as your mind struggles to name it. Ancient currents, older than the stones of the chapel, seem to pulse along the curvature of the steps, activating forgotten memories and unearthing the echoes of those who have ascended before. You feel their presence, not as ghosts, but as imprints, residual awareness left behind in the architecture itself, warning and guiding simultaneously. Here, the boundary between observer and participant collapses. Your heartbeat synchronizes with the rhythm of the spiral, subtle yet undeniable. Thoughts that were once hidden begin to surface. Questions of existence, of purpose, of the unseen design threading through history. This is why the church feared the staircase, Why decades of silence surround it? It does not merely elevate the body, it elevates or exposes the mind. And as the staircase coils deeper and deeper, you sense the hidden chamber below, a repository of knowledge and experience, a node in a system that has persisted for centuries. It waits for the correct alignment, the precise resonance, the one willing to step fully into the spiral and embrace the awakening. You are now part of that lineage, whether you realize it or not, connected to a current of power and memory intentionally concealed, yet eternally present, guiding those who dare to follow it. By the 18th step, the spiral staircase is no longer merely an architectural anomaly. It is a living instrument of transformation. Every curve, every turn, seems to reach into the very core of your perception, adjusting, calibrating, exposing fissures in memory and awareness that you never knew existed. Visitors to the chapel have reported subtle shifts in orientation, moments of vertigo, inexplicable flashes of recollection, memories that do not belong to them, yet feel intimately personal. The pattern of the spiral resonates not only with the structure itself, but with something embedded within human consciousness, something the architects, the clergy, and the builders understood and feared. It is precise, deliberate, and unforgiving, a ritual coded in wood and stone, designed to awaken, test, and in some cases, transform. Beneath the visible staircase, the hidden chamber pulses with potential, a repository of intent and energy accumulated over centuries, waiting for the right alignment to unlock. And as you ascend, the realization dawns. The spiral is a map, a calibration device, a doorway. It bypasses doctrine, bypasses understanding, bypasses the safety nets humanity has relied upon for millennia. And now, as the hum of energy grows faintly beneath your feet, you understand why those who walked it before either vanished or returned irrevocably changed. This staircase does not forgive curiosity. It does not tolerate hesitation. It remembers, it records, it demands. And in that demand, you feel the pulse of history, the hidden intentions of those long dead, and the echo of knowledge they try to bury, but could never fully contain. At the 19th step, the staircase reveals its true nature, not as wood and craftsmanship, but as a machine of influence, a conductor of memory and awareness. The air itself seems charged, vibrating imperceptibly, coaxing your senses in a heightened alertness. Every turn you take is a calibration, aligning your perception with something older, deeper, and more deliberate than any human design. Visitors have described it as hearing whispers in their skulls, glimpsing patterns and shadows, sensing presences that do not exist, yet undeniably feel alive. The second stair, infamous among caretakers, thrums beneath your foot, a subtle, almost imperceptible pulse, as if the structure itself is alive, aware, watching. It is here that the boundary between reality and the hidden becomes porous. The hidden chamber below, sealed and forbidden, waits silently, its purpose encoded into the spiral, a repository not just of objects, but of accumulated intent, knowledge, and power. And as you climb, the understanding emerges slowly, almost unwillingly. The spiral does not merely ascend, it transforms. It challenges, awakens, and in some cases consumes. Those who vanished, those who returned altered, We're all participants in this design. It is not merely a staircase. It is a test, a mirror, a key. And as you near the top, the pull from beneath grows stronger. The resonance of the hidden chamber thrums against your bones, reminding you that some truths are not meant to be seen lightly, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. At the 20th and final step, the staircase no longer belongs to the chapel or to the world you thought you knew. It becomes a conduit, a bridge between what was intentionally forgotten and the awareness you now carry. The hidden chamber beneath, sealed by copper, shadow, and secrecy, hums faintly, alive with centuries of intent, memory, and unspeakable knowledge. The air grows thick, almost tangible, vibrating with a frequency that bypasses comprehension, bypasses logic, bypasses even fear itself. Those who have ascended this far have spoken of visions that do not fade, of memories implanted or revealed, of a realization that reality itself is structured, curated, and manipulated by forces unseen. The staircase was never about ascent or descent. It was about awakening, initiation, exposure to truths the architects of faith, power, and time tried to bury. And now, standing at the apex, you feel it. The weight of centuries, the presence of unseen observers, the hum of a machine older than humanity, older than the church, older than the land itself. The spiral has completed its work. You're no longer a visitor. You're a participant. You are remembered. And as the whispers fade and the chamber waits beneath, the question remains. Now that you know, now that you have seen, will you turn back or step fully into the knowledge that was never meant to be yours and embrace the descent that continues beyond the spiral into the very architecture of forgotten power?